In this video, we're going to make a multiplier release video. These are usually made in Algodo, but I have no idea how that works, so I'll be using the Unity game engine. We'll briefly discuss the basics of Unity, but if you want a proper tutorial on how to use it, there are many channels on YouTube that are much better than mine with videos that already cover that. There will be some scripting involved. You don't need to know how to code, although it will be helpful. There are probably better ways of doing what I'll be showing you. If you follow along, you should have a functional simulation by the end. Before we start, go and install Unity. Any version is fine. When you're done and you open up the Unity Hub, you're going to create a new 2D project. Let's call it multiply or release. I'll be covering different aspects of the Unity interface as we go along. For starters, let's create a marble. And let's enable some screen highlighting. Here on the left, this is called the hierarchy. This shows you a listing of all the objects in your scene. So if I right click here, in this menu I can create objects. So I want to have a circle, which is under 2D object, sprites, circle. And let's give it a name, call it marble. You can see here in the scene view, there's our marble. In the scene view, you can move the camera around. This is with the middle mouse button, and you can zoom in with the scroll wheel or zoom out. You can see these handles will allow you to resize this as you want. Just going to undo that because I want to keep the default size. You can also use these tools here at the top left. So with this one, this allows you to move the object around. So you'll see there's the two arrows and this blue box. So if I click and drag the blue box, I can move my marble around. On the right is the inspector that shows you all of the properties of the object you've selected. So the marble has a transform and a sprite renderer. The transform determines the scale and the position and rotation of the object. So currently it's at this position. So if I want to set that back to 0, I can just click over there and type in 0. If I want to change the color of the marble, I can go here to the sprite renderer, color, and if I click over here, this gives up the color wheel, and here you can select whatever color you want. I'm going to make it red. Then I can click away from that. Now marble needs to move, and we'll be making it move using the physics engine. So here in the inspector, click on add component and look for rigid body. There are two rigid body types, rigid body and rigid body 2D. The normal rigid body refers to the 3D engine. We're not going to be using that. So anytime you see a normal version and 2D version, we're only going to be using the 2D version. They don't interact with each other, so you need to make sure that these are always the same. Now, if I want to see this in action, I can go here to the top and click on the play button. You'll see the marble drops immediately. That's because it's under the influence of physics and it has gravity. You'll see this white border over here with the camera icon in the middle that shows our camera. We can also make it smaller or bigger by changing the camera property size. So I want to make it a bit bigger. So I'm going to change this 5 to maybe something like a 10. It's going to give us enough space to put all our things. Next we need a surface for the marble to bounce on. But before we do that, we need to give the marble a collider that will allow it to collide with other objects. So back to add component, let's look for circle collider, 2D. Now you'll see there's a little green circle around it that shows the size of the circle collider. So if you wanted this to be a different size than the sprite itself, you can change the radius over here. Instead of clicking and typing, you can also click and drag on the word itself. You'll see the two little arrows pop up. So if I click and drag that to the right, I can make it bigger or smaller. I'm just going to reset this to what it was. Now we need a surface of some sort. So back to the hierarchy, I'm going to do the same thing. Right click, 2D object, sprite, square. So there it's created a square for me. I'm going to give it a nice gray color. I'm just going to click and drag, there we go. This does not need a rigid body, so I'm just going to add the box collider 2D. Now let's make it a bit bigger. I'm going to change back to the other tool, the rectangle tool. Let's click and drag those. Now I'm going to play again. And see the marble has landed. But we want the marble to be a bit bouncy. So now we're going to add what's called a physics material. So here at the bottom, we've got this project window. This is where all of the assets in your project, things like images and sounds and scripts will live. You'll see there's already a folder with scenes, and this is the default scene. That's the only asset in your project at the start. So here I'm going to right click in the empty space, and I'm going to go create 2D physics material 2D. Let's give it a name. I'm going to call it bouncy. Now with this selected, you'll see the inspector now shows the properties of this material, and I'm going to change the bounciness to 1, which is 100%. Now I'm going to click on my marble again. Now there are two ways to assign the material to this. You can either click on this little button over here, and it shows you all applicable assets, or you can click and drag the object from here into this field. Now let's see what happens. You see it is now bouncing. Now let's quickly make a area for the marble to bounce in. And let's put our marble in there. Okay, looking good. Now just for neatness, I'm going to put all of these objects in one container. So here in the hierarchy, I'm going to shift click to select all of them. I'm going to right click and create empty parent. Let's call this trigger area. Now we need the triggers for the multiply or release. Let me just make this little one over here to separate them. So again, I'm going to create a square. I'm going to change its color to green, or lime if you want to be pedantic. Maybe resize it like that. And this will also need the box collider. But on this box collider, we're going to tick the is trigger. This means that when the marble touches it, it won't bounce off, but we can use a script to make it do stuff when the trigger is entered. Next, we need a script that's going to do stuff. So I like to put all of my scripts in the scripts folder. So here in assets, I'm going to create a new folder. Call it scripts. In the scripts folder, I'm going to create a new C# script. Let's call it trigger. Wait for it to load. I'm going to go back to my trigger object, and let's call it trigger. So I'm going to click twice and then call it trigger. This will be our multiply trigger. So you can either add it the way we added the other components by looking for it like that. That's our new script. Or you can click and drag it out of here into the borders between two of the components where that blue appears. So now I've got the trigger script on our trigger object. Now to edit the script, you're going to double click. If Visual Studio isn't launching, it could be that it either isn't installed, so go back to your Unity installer, make sure you download and install it, or it could be that it's not linked. In the case that it's not linked, you might have to come here to Unity Preferences and set up the external script editor over here. Okay, so I've got my script open. By default, you'll have two functions, the start and update function, and it very helpfully explains what happens. Start happens once at the start. Update is called once per frame. So the way a game engine works is that it's constantly looping through however many frames per second, maybe 60 frames a second. So if it's running at 60 frames per second, this update function is going to run every single frame, every 60 times a second. We won't be using this function for the trigger. What we will be using is when the trigger is entered. And for that, we use a function called onTriggerEnter2D. Now remember before about the ones without 2D or 3D, and they don't work together. So I want the 2D version. So whenever something enters the trigger, this function will run. So let's see what happens. I'm going to do print collision.gameObject. This will tell me what has entered the trigger. I'm going to save this, go back to Unity, and let's put the marble here by the trigger. The print line will go here to the console, which is over here. So let's play that. So you see over there it says the marble has entered. Every time it enters, that is going to print. But what we needed to do is to double the player's number. So we need to keep track of what the player's number is. We'll do that in a player script. So I'm going to create a new script for player. Each of the 4 players in the game will have their own instance of this. Let's open that up. So a player needs a color. So I'm going to do public color. Apparently you're not supposed to make things public like this, but I don't really understand why, so this is the way I do it. Then we're going to need a number keeping track of what the current number is. So I'm going to do an integer. Let's call it current number, and this will start at 1. We'll need a track for how many ammo the player's left for shooting. So let's call it int ammo left. That will be 0. So let's go back to our trigger. When the marble enters, we need to tell the marble's player that it needs to double its number. So we also need a script for the marble, which is going to link us between the trigger and the player. I'm going to create a new script, marble. I'm going to add it to my marble. Put that in there. Open it up, and here I just want a reference to the player, so public player, and we can save that. So if we go back to our trigger script, first we're going to check if the object entering it has a marble script attached to it. The way we're going to do that is marble is equal to collision game object get component marble. So this will check if the object has a marble attached. And then we want to only proceed if that is not null, meaning if there is a marble, then we'll do what's in here, otherwise do nothing. And here we want to say marble.player, so that's referencing the marble's player, dot current number is equal to marble.player.current number times 2. Okay. So now we can see this in action. But first we need to add an instance of the player script to this. Let's actually call this player trigger area. So let's add player script. This will be our red player. And then we need to tell the marble that that is the player it's working for. So if we go to the marble and the player, This is the only one available. But as before, you can also click and drag from there into here. So this is associating them with each other. So now if we play, remember we made the variable over here, the current number. So you'll see every time it bounces, we're just doubling it. So that is working correctly. Next we need the release trigger. So let's make a copy of this one. Make it red. Now we need a way of knowing that this is a multiply trigger and this is a release trigger. So if we go back to our trigger script, I'm going to use an enum for this. So public enum trigger type, and this will either be multiply or release. So this is defining this type of enum. An enum is basically just a number with a name, just to make it easier to keep track of. Then I'm going to have a variable for that. So now, before I implement it, if we go back here, let's also fix this one's name. This is the release trigger. So here we'll see that enum, that variable, is now showing here. So this is a type multiply. And if we click on our release one, let's change that to type release. And now let's use it. So just before we increase the player's number, we're going to do a switch statement. So switch on type. And then case trigger type is multiply. We're going to put this in there. Break. And then we also need case trigger type dot release. So what we need to do in this case is back to marble.player. We're going to set its ammo to its current number. And we're going to set its current number back to 0. Or rather to 1. Okay, let's see if that's working. Click on our player, we'll see the numbers going up. Now you can actually move objects around while you're in the editor. So you'll see here, every time we test, we automatically switch to the game window. But you can also go to the scene window. Now I'm going to select my marble. And it's a bit difficult to catch it while it's moving around, so I'm going to pause with this button. Then I'm going to move it here to the release area and resume. So now if we click on our player, that is not working. Why is that not working? We should probably rather add the ammo instead of setting it. Because for example, if you've got 400 shots left and then you roll another one, then you're going to lose your 400. So I'm going to change this equal to a plus equal. Okay, where are we now? Next, let's talk about prefabs. This marble area we're going to copy for each player. So one way to do that is to copy the whole thing and move it around. Or we can save it as a prefab. So let's create a new folder for our prefabs. And in particular, the marble will want to be a prefab because we might be creating more marbles in future. So to do that, I'm going to click and drag this into the folder. So you'll see it's now turned blue, the text over there indicating it's a prefab. So instead of copying it from here, I can drag more copies of it in from here. Any changes I make to this is going to affect all of them. So if I make all of them a bit bigger, they're all a bit bigger. Okay, let's undo that. So the player trigger area I also want to make into a prefab. One thing I forgot to do over here we need to move the marble back to the top after it enters one of the triggers. So we need a reference to a position, and I'm going to right click here and create an empty game object. Let's call this spawn point. Now even empty game objects have a transform, which we can get the position from, even though if it doesn't have any sprite. I'm going to move this here to the top. Back in my trigger, I'm going to create a variable for it, so public transform spawn point. And while we're in the script, we're also going to move the marble back to the spawn point. So here after the switch statement, we'll say marble.transform.position is equal to spawn point.position. Next we need to reference it. So I'm going to select both of my triggers because I'm going to set the spawn point for both of them. Okay, let's see if this works. Should probably make the marble a bit smaller. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's make this a prefab again. Play a trigger area. So what's better about making it a prefab is if I'm going to make changes to this and I have copies, I need to make the changes manually to each one. But if I have a prefab and then I want to make changes, I'll make it in the prefab and then it will apply to all of them. So let's see how that works. Let's make another one over there. Now let's maybe make all of these dots a bit smaller. So I'm going to double click on the prefab to open it. And then I'm going to take all my dots, left click drag. It's going to make these a bit smaller like that. So now if we click on this little arrow over here, we're going to go back to the scene and you will see it's applied to both of them. So let's make this our blue player and let's make a yellow player and a lime green player. Next we need the terrain itself. To do this I'm going to first need a prefab for the block because we're going to be creating a lot of blocks. So as before, right click. Another way we can create objects instead of right clicking here is here at the top, game object. This gives you the same menu. So I'm going to create a square. Okay, so this will be the grid size. This will need a box collider 2D again. This will also be a trigger because we don't want our own bullets to be blocked. We'll need a script for it. So I'm going to create a block script. We are also going to need a bullet. So let's create another circle sprite. And this one will be much smaller. Let's call this bullet. Call this block. So our bullet will need a circle collider. It will also need a rigid body. But on this rigid body, I'm going to disable gravity because it needs to move in a straight line. I'm going to change gravity scale to 0. And we'll need a script for the bullet. So let's add these scripts, block script and bullet script. So if we go into our block script, we're going to use the same function as the trigger, which is the on trigger enter. On trigger enter. We're going to check if there's a bullet. Okay, so let's cancel that stuff. Bullet, bullet. Check if the collision has a bullet. If bullet is not null, proceed. We need to check if the bullet player is the same or different to the blocks player. So we need to know who the current player, who the current owner of the block is. So I'll create that, public player player. We also need to know who the player of the bullet is. So let's add the same in the bullet. player, player. So back to our block script. We're checking if there's a bullet. Then we're going to go if bullet.player is not equal to blocks player, which is this one over here. Then we're going to change the player. So we're going to say player is equal to bullet.player, and we're going to destroy the bullet, destroy bullet.gameObject. If we just destroy bullet, it's just going to remove the script but leave the rest of the object. We also need to change the color of the block, so we'll need a reference to the sprite renderer. That's where we were changing the color earlier. So public sprite renderer, and we'll set sprite renderer, not the class, sprite renderer dot color is equal to player dot color. I've got those. Now I'm going to save both of these as prefabs, block prefab and bullet prefab. Now I need a way to create blocks everywhere. We can either do it manually, and we can even use the grid snapping. So here at the top where it says local, change that to global. Then I can enable this magnet tool. That's going to make it snap to the grid. But I'm very lazy, and why would you spend 10 minutes doing something manually when you can spend 30 minutes failing to automate it? So we're going to create a map script. Let's call it map. And we'll need a container for it. So I'm going to create another empty game object. I want to put this at the center because the blocks are going to be created around it. I'm going to call it map. I'm going to add it. Open up the script. So here we're finally going to use the prefabs we've created. And the way you reference it is using a game object variable. So public game object block prefab. Then we need to know how many rows and columns we're creating. So it looks like we've got 20 by 20. So integer count x 20 and count y is 20. And then we're going to do a nested for loop. So we're going to loop into each row and into each column. So for, change these to going to highlight that, press Ctrl R and Ctrl R to refactor it because I want that to be X. And then I'm going to create another for loop for the Y. Autofill is being helpful today. Then I'm going to create the block. So I'm going to instantiate the block prefab, and it will be at the position of the map plus the offset according to this for loop. And for rotation, we're going to use quaternion identity, which keeps it at the default rotation. So what this offset is doing, as we're looping through values of x and y, this is increasing. So each block will be in a grid. So now let's go back to Unity. We need to assign the block prefab. Go to prefabs, put the block in there, delete this one. So now they've been created the wrong place. They need to be offset a bit. I always forget how to do this correctly. So let's say vector 3. So vector 3 is a position. Offset is equal to new vector 3. And this will be count x over 2, count y over 2. Then I'm going to add the offset over here as well. And it made it worse. I need to subtract it. Change it like that. But it's still not quite right. It needs to be offset by half a space. So let's just fix this manually. No, not over there. 0.5. So in C#, if you want to have a decimal, you need to put the F at the end for float. Otherwise, it's going to complain like that. Okay. Why is it getting worse? Let's undo all of this. Sorry, I'm doing this all wrong. We need to actually add 1 to this, convert it to a float, and then divide by 2. Let's see if that works. Hey. Plus 1.0 f. Or is that minus 1? Hey, it worked. Okay. There's all our blocks. Now we need our players to shoot the blocks. We also need a cannon for each player. So I will be adding these in the player prefab. Let's just containerize this a bit more. Let's create another circle. Call it cannon. And inside of that, we're going to create a square. Call it barrel. Make it a bit smaller. Stick out a bit. We'll need a reference to it. So back in our player script, we need a transform for barrel. I'll assign that over there. We also need a prefab for the bullet, a public game object, bullet prefab. And let's assign that. This one over here. So now we want to say in our update, so this will run every frame. If ammo is more than 0, then we're going to shoot. So we're going to instantiate the bullet prefab, and this will be at the barrel.position, and we need to make it have some velocity. So what I'm going to do is save this reference to the newly created bullet. So I'm going to do game object G is equal to that. So when this runs, it's going to save it to G. Then I'm going to get a reference to the bullet. So bullet is g.getComponentBullet. And we need a reference to the rigid body of the bullet. So let's go back to the bullet script. Public rigid body 2D rigid body. So bullet.rigidbody.velocity will be the barrel. So relative to the barrel, if we're looking in the right direction, and then we need to multiply it by some velocity, which is hard coding something for now. And we need to change the color of the bullet. So we'll also need a sprite renderer reference. Sprite renderer. So bullet.spriterenderer.color, and we'll set that to the color. So now let's see if that works. Go back here. See, all of the player areas now have their own cannon, so we're just going to move those around. So put this one over here, put this one down here, put this one over here. Let's see if that works. Oh, we need to assign some variables. Yeah, always when you're doing something wrong, just look at the console and it will tell you what you're doing wrong. If you want to see exactly where it went wrong, you can double click on this. So here it's telling me that it can't find this reference, bullet.rigidbody. The reason is because I haven't assigned it. So let's go to our bullet prefab. The bullet script, there's no rigid body and there's no sprite renderer. So I need to assign it from the prefab. So click drag from bullet into there and into there. Let's check if we did the same for our block. We did not. instead of doing it inside the prefab, you can also do it if it's at top level from the prefab. So I've got block selected. I'm going to click and drag that into there. Let's try again. Oh, we're forgetting something. We need to reduce the ammo. Ammo left, minus minus, to set it to -1. Also, it seems to not be colliding. Why is that? Bullet. Oh, our bullet needs a player. So bullet.player is equal to this. Try again. Okay. Here we've already got a bug. You saw the first bullet, it took over 2 blocks. That's because when it spawned over here, it immediately collided with both of them. So we need to, in our block, we need to check that the bullet hasn't already been used. So I'm going to do that in the bullet. I'll create a boolean. Has been used is equal to false. So in the block, in addition to checking if the player is different, I'm going to do and bullet dot has been used is equal to false. And then I'm going to set it to used. Bullet dot has been used is equal to true. See if that works. Yep, only taking 1. Next thing we need to fix is that the cannon, first of all, it's not visible, and second of all, it's not turning. The reason it's not visible is because everything is on the same layer. So depending on in which order it's been spawned, different things are visible. So I'm going to go into my player game object, and I'm going to select both the cannon and the barrel and change the sprite renderer order in layer to 1. So the higher the number, the higher number will always be rendered on top of the lower number. Now we want this one to rotate, but for that we'll need another container. But first, let me just show you how to do this. So go to Window, Animation. This opens up this animation tab, and here click on Create Clip. So let's call that cannon rotation, and then click on this recording button to enable recording mode. And what I want this to do is to rotate. So I'm going to go up to the inspector and change the Z rotation. So I want it to start at -90. So to swing from there up to there. Then here in the timeline, I'm going to click on the 1 second mark and change that back to 0. So let's see how that looks. Click on the play button. So it would rotate and then snaps back, because I need to have it also rotate back. So I'm now scrolling down in the timeline to get more time. So I'll click on 2 and change that to -90 again. Okay, there we go. So now you'll see, if we play this, I need to make the block default color something else so that we can actually see what's happening. Now they're all rotating in the same orientation, which doesn't help us, because green will never shoot up. So what I'm going to do is to create a container for it. So cannon, right click, create empty parent. We'll call this cannon container. So now if we go back to our animation and play this, if we rotate the container around, the cannon will rotate relative to it. So if I change this rotation, because the cannon is not in the center, so cannon needs to be in the center of its container. See where it is, it's over there. So we move the cannon container to there, and then if we rotate it and we play our animation, it's now doing it relative to there, which is fine. Okay. So now we need to fix all of these guys. So you need to be rotated Why is this doing? Hey. Okay. Let's redo this. Delete all of these. Fix this while we're at it. I want this to be a round number. Is this going to help me? Oh no, this isn't helping me at all. I'm going to fix some things in here. So I want it all to line up with the grid. So if we just make everything at 0, I want it to line up with that. So I'll move all of this stuff over there. Change the grid snap a bit smaller. So I still want this to line up to 5. Line up over there. Line up over there. Line up over there. There we go. Why is it not respecting my object snap? That's okay, I'll just do it manually. And this one, 12.5 and 0, 12.5 and minus 10. Okay. Now let's check Canon. I want that to be, gotta be kidding me. Canon contain. Oh, I know what I did. I moved the Canon instead of the Canon container. Okay, let's see if that solves all my problems. You up there. Okay, that's fine. So let's check that this is rotating the right way. Select it, animation. Okay, great. Now this one will go over there and rotate some more. And this one over here, rotate 270. Oh, this is fun. Oh yes, the spawn point. Recall we create the spawn point, but when I fixed this around, I didn't fix that. Let's put that back up there. We also need to fix the color of the marble. So let's create a reference to the sprite renderer. Sprite renderer. So when it starts, we'll say the color is equal to the player's color. And let's not forget to reference the sprite renderer. Okay, that's working well. We need to show what the player's current number is. So let's create that. I'm going to create a new empty over here. Let's call it label. I'm going to add a component called a text mesh pro text. The first time you create it, you'll need to import the essentials. So just click this once. You can close that dialog. And let's just type in a nice big number so you can see how it looks. Going to just center that, change it back to 1. Now we need a reference to it. So the player script will be in charge of assigning the number to it. So I'm going to create a TM Pro text, this one. Call it label. So in the update script, I'm just going to say label.text is equal to current number to string. Click on our player, assign the reference, test to see if it works. So now if we see a multiply, that's going well. See how it goes for a bit. So one thing we want is the bullets to actually be visible. The blocks are the same color as the bullets, so that's not helping us. So let's create 2 different colors. So we'll Control R, call this bullet color. And let's create color block color. So when we change a block, we'll change this to the player's block color. So bullet color, nice and bright. Let's not forget to change the alpha, otherwise it's invisible. Block color will be a dark green, yellow, that's kind of olive, blue, maybe something a bit lighter because blue is quite dark. And alpha, and red, and then kind of maroon. Just see what would happen if we have a lot of ammo. Change that to 100. That's a lot of bullets. We should probably not fire them so quickly. But while we're looking at this, I see another problem. These bullets aren't bouncing off the walls and they're escaping off the top. So let's first fix the problem at the top. We'll create some squares up there. Give it a box collider. Make it big. And one at the bottom. And the cannons need to be all the way in the corner so that it can also capture the first block that's right in the corner. That one and that one. For the bounciness, we'll do it the same way we did the marble. On our bullet prefab, we'll just assign the bouncy material. Okay, let's stop it from shooting too much. Let's add a variable for cooldown. So float cooldown left. So if ammo left is more than 0, we're going to see if the cooldown is ready. If we can do it in here. And cooldown left is less than or equal to 0. Then we're going to set cooldown left. Let's maybe make it 0.1 so we shoot 10 times a second. I also want multipliers to happen a bit more frequently. So I want first of all the marble to be a bit smaller. And then this border can maybe be over there. Maybe a bit further. This one for the gap. Let's see if it works. What just happened there? Green got 4 but only shot 1. What's happening here? Ammo left. Oh, I need to reduce the cooldown. So cooldown left minus equal time.delta time. So time.delta time is the time between each time this update function runs. Now it should be a bit better. There we go. Okay. Next I want to have a bit of a border effect around the blocks, and I'm going to be lazy with that and simply make the block tiny bit smaller. But I want a black background instead of blue. That blue background we see comes from the camera. So I'll click on the camera and the background. I'll just change that to black, like that. Let's see there. Yeah, that's looking a bit better. We should probably also make the grid size configurable. So let's go back to my really horrendous code over here in the map. So we're just using the default spacing of 1, but really we need to make that based on the number of blocks we're creating. So let's also say what the game map size is. Size X is 20, size Y is 20, and then we need a spacing. So we'll determine the spacing based on the size. So spacing is equal to size X divided by count X. So if I increase that to 40, then the spacing should be half. Let's check that. Double the counts. I forgot to implement it. So here in our loop, we just need to multiply each of these by our spacing. Spacing. What am I doing wrong now? Offset is still wrong. So we did that, but this needs to be multiplied by spacing. So we'll just do that over there. Did that work? It did, but the blocks are still big. So we need to change the scale of the block. First I need a reference to it. So get the reference and then g.transform.local scale. And we'll just multiply this by the spacing. What is going on here? Oh, it's just because of the pixel density. I was thinking that I'm creating blocks in a weird way. If we just change this even smaller. There we go. Okay. I probably want to lock the aspect ratio. So I'll just, in the game view, just change this to full HD. Scale out a bit. But now the trigger areas aren't fitting, so I need to make them a bit smaller. Let's see over here. So that needs to be quite a bit smaller, just past the green area. Yeah, let's see if that had the effect. We need to move those across, and we need to delete everything past the border. Delete. This needs to be smaller over there. And this one. Just have that centered nicely. Okay, so you need to come across to about there. And your cannon needs to go over there. There on the border, yes. And this one. And the cannons. And that cannon. And we need to fix the numbers as well. Put this right there in the center. See if that's working correctly. Someone's finally getting a big number. Oh boy. Okay, red's just gonna win. If it ever shoots. Okay, there we go. Still need to move the cannons up just a little bit so that they can hit the corners or the edges. That'll take a while. We also need a victory condition so that when the bullet hits the player will lose. We'll need a trigger on the cannon. Trigger. And let's create a script for it. Cannon. Yeah, we just need a reference to the player. We'll do the same as the block. On trigger, enter. Bullet is that. Bullet is not null. Bullet.player is not equal to player. Then we'll destroy the player. So then we'll do destroy player.gameObject. So we need to put the cannon script in there, because this is where we've got the circle collider. And then we just need to reference the player. And I said I wanted to move the cannons right up into the corner. Another problem we'll have if we... let me show you. Okay, let's grab one of these bullets. So if I put this bullet here in yellow, see, yellow has lost, but now bullets will be able to escape out the side. So let's make a copy of this barrier just for over there and on the other side. Yeah, so at this point you've pretty much made the whole thing. All that's left is recording. Oh, that's a fun one. I'm gonna leave it like that. So you can either use OBS or something like that to record, but Unity also has a built-in recording function. So let's install and use that. So we'll go to Window, Package Manager, and I just want to dock it over here. And Packages and Project, change that to Unity Registry, and wait for it to load. Scroll down to Recorder. You at the top right, click Install. Go back in here. Go to Window, General, Recorder, Recorder Window. I'm just going to dock this here on the right. Add Recorder, Movie. I want the source to be the game view. I want 60 FPS. So what's useful about this is if your game is very laggy or your PC is very weak and it can't perform at 60 FPS, the movie will slow down the game so that it's recording each of those frames. So when you do the playback, it will be at 60 FPS. You can also uncap it, which will make it potentially run faster than that. So if I try and record this now, okay, let's go watch the record. In your PC, wherever you save the project, there will be a new folder called recordings. And there's your video. So now you can upload it to YouTube or whatever. Do a couple more quality of life improvements. We normally like the marbles to have a bit of a trail. So let's add that. I'm going to add component trail renderer. It's a bit big and pink, which doesn't help me. So I want this width to be a bit smaller. So I can select that little red dot and bring it down. I don't want it to be pink, so I need to scroll down to materials and assign a material. I'm just going to use the default line. I'll want it to be the player color, but I'll do that in the script in a moment. I also want it to tape off in the end, so I'm just going to double click here to create this little guy. See, now it tapers off a bit. And the time is how long it stays there for. I want this to be quite short. Now let's go back into our marble script. I need a reference to the trail renderer. And then I'm going to we'll set the trail renderer's start color to the bullet color. And the end color we want to be a bit faded. So I'm going to create a new color, is equal to player.bullet color, and I'm going to set its alpha, which is the transparency. Let's make it 0. And trail renderer end color is equal to C. Let's not forget to assign the trail renderer. Marble over there. There we go. So you can use the same method to also add trails to the bullets. Let's also increase the number of marbles over time. So maybe every minute let's create another marble for the players. And while we're at it, we're going to remove the marble from here, because it won't be needed anymore. In our player script, we need a prefab, game object marble prefab. We'll need a cooldown left, so cooldown right, very helpful. Marble spawn cooldown, let's make it a minute, and marble spawn cooldown left. So just like this, we're going to do marble spawn cooldown left minus equal time.delta time. If marble spawn cooldown left is less than 0, marble spawn cooldown left is equal to marble spawn cooldown. The reason I'm doing it this way instead of this is so that I can easily change this number in the editor. I don't need to come back here to change it. While we're at it, let's make the shooting a little bit faster, maybe 20 times a second. And then I need to create a marble. So I'm going to do it the same way as this. It's equal to instantiate marble prefab. And this will be at the spawn point. I need a reference to the spawn point as well. Public transform, not transfer function. Transform spawn point. Spawn point dot position. Quaternion dot identity. And then marble m is equal to g dot get component marble. So we want the sprite renderer color to be this color, and we want the player to be this. And let's also create a little bit of random movement at the start, because as I'm sure you've noticed when we were playing, the same thing always happened. Like the red would always have that little bullet effect. So rigid body, I need a reference to that. Public rigid body dot velocity is equal to, let's make a new vector 2. Here we'll use the random function, random dot value and random.value to give it a very slight little difference. While we're at it, we need to remove this from here, because what's going to happen is this is going to create the marble, the start is going to run, the player won't be assigned yet. So I'm going to create a new function for doing the setup, public void setup, and I'm going to feed it a player. I'm going to put all of this in here, and then I'll just say player is equal to p. And while I'm at it, I'm going to move out this stuff as well. So all of this, cancel, put it in here. Can take out the M reference, and this will be player reference. I'm already doing that. Take that out, rigid body dot velocity is random. So now all I need to do is call the setup function with the player as a reference. See if that's all working. So for testing, I'm just going to make the marble cooldown much lower. Spawn point not assigned. Okay, let's do that. Spawn point is spawn point. While we're at it, we're being a little bit redundant over here, because on the triggers we're referencing the spawn point, but also in the player. So we can neaten that up a little bit by, in the trigger, we'll rather use the player spawn point, or the marble.player spawn point. Now we can take this out, we don't need it anymore. And I think, yeah, I forgot to do the rigid body over there. Do that. Prefab not assigned, good stuff. Marble prefab, there we go. Anything else I forgot? Let's see. Okay, there's our marbles, and they're all a little bit different. And there's more marbles. Okay, so we've got a full multiplier release game. I'm not sure if I'll make another tutorial on this in particular, but if there's other aspects you want to see, let me know in the comments. If there's other video tutorials you'd like to see on this channel or anything else, please let me know. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly I want to do in this channel. For now, the idea is to do some tutorials and some general stuff, or maybe some gameplay. I don't know. I'll see how it goes. Thank you for watching.